So first up, we have Hanif Abdurraqib. Hanif is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. He is the author of several books, including There's Always This Year, A Little Devil in America, and They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us.
Hey, Sam, good to see you. Sam was my neighbor when I lived here. I feel like I should be telling everyone that because it's so cool. We lived above and below each other for like 2 years.
Hanif was a really good neighbor. I remember talking to you about poetry at the coffee shop around the corner.
Yep.
Yeah.
What a dream. I guess I should read. I'm going to read something. I'm going to read the poem I got published in this issue, which is a series of poems that all share the same title. I'm going to read a few more of these tonight. They are broadly orbiting skepticism about the afterlife and how to use that skepticism to think better about the many heavens that can emerge on earth. This poem is called There Are More Ways to Show Devotion. Than even the complexity of the shadow, dragging my own darkness behind and beside me. On a day I do not want to get out of bed, I lift an arm and darkness expands on a white wall, a wound sealing itself over the promise of moonlight. And this is how I remind myself I am not dead yet. Even in stillness, I am a straight line projected somewhere beyond myself, raised gently into the dwindling brightness, a casket waiting to be swallowed. But it isn't all bad. Have you considered your own loneliness is simply a lack of imagination? A child is crying on a plane, devastated by the volume and velocity that leaving and returning requires. A man lifts his window and makes his hands into what the shadow translates into a bird, its wings flapping slowly along the airplane's side, and the child sighs with the sweetness of disbelief. There is a bird in my backyard, and it is dead in an unremarkable way. Storm or electricity or hunger. I reach my palm toward the light, and my shadow holds the dead. In the darkness I make, I apologize for a world that could not keep you safe. I apologize for the white wall and all I've asked it to forget and relearn, but now we are talking about eternity, and I prefer a God who makes no promises beyond the one that says at the end of it all, there will be a shovel and someone will have to do the digging.
Thank you, Hanif.
Yeah.
It's amazing to hear that out loud. So you're a poet and a nonfiction writer, and in some senses that means that this prize is perfect for you because it crosses genres, and we have people who work in all kinds of different forms here. But I also noticed that the prize website does sort of give each person a designation, and yours is nonfiction.
Yeah.
Your latest book is nonfiction. It was just longlisted, right, for the National Book Award, which is very exciting. And I'm curious how it feels to be honored for nonfiction. Specifically, I first knew you as a poet. How do you think about that in relationship to your poetry? Does it surprise you that that's sort of...
No, but I do think... I wrote nonfiction first. I was a struggling music critic before I was anything else, but I became a better writer when I found poetry. I discovered poetry on my own. In 2012, 2013, I started just locking myself in a room in Columbus, Ohio, and reading a bunch of poems and teaching myself how to write them. I didn't study poetry, and for folks who know anything about my life and career, I don't have an MFA. I was awful at college. I studied marketing. And so I had to teach myself how to write poems, which actually gave me a real freedom. To kind of build my own MFA was to read someone and then mimic them. Gabby Calvacaresi was someone early on. The first book I got was their book, The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, which was, I don't know if anyone knows, do you know that book, Gabby Calvacaresi's first book? It's their first book, right? Gabby's first book is a book of poems that are all in persona, which is a daring move. It's all these persona poems in the voice of people watching Amelia Earhart get into the plane for the last time. And so that person's first book, their first book is saying, here is a book of poems, but you will not get my voice yet, which means that I can therefore be flexible and show you both nothing and everything. And to me, that's an act of nonfiction too. I don't believe nonfiction is necessarily an articulation of hard fact. It can be, but I'm not a historian. I am in some ways trying to write nonfiction as an archive of rapidly dissolving memories. And that requires some poetic device. And so in some ways, I'm tricking people into reading poetry. There's always this here is kind of, I mean, I think of it as kind of like one long extended poem. There are actual literal poems embedded in the book, but also the book's structure and form and flow. It's kind of like a four, multiple long poems kind of weave together. And people can call that whatever they want, but it is, I think, using metaphor, imagery, pace, style, all the things that are embedded in my poems are also embedded in my nonfiction. And so if I'm not governed by genre, then I can make a playful and rich archive, I think.
Totally, and that I can see that in the shape of your nonfiction and the way that those books move. And I love the idea of learning from someone's first book. I feel like that makes a lot of sense to me, that you can see more clearly what someone's trying to do and the moves they're making in
I love a first book. I love a first book. I don't love my first book, I suppose, but I guess that's the way of it. But I love reading first books of poems, especially because you get to see people stumbling towards something that later illuminates itself, I think, in their work, if they're lucky.
You gave us 2 pieces for this issue, which is amazing. The other one is prose, and it's we have this sort of new column called Objects of Desire, where we ask writers to write briefly about something that they have some intense relationship with, an object, something in the world. And you wrote about, appropriately, a piece of vintage clothing, really amazing sounding jacket from a Bruce Springsteen tour that I was like so nervous when you revealed that you actually wear it out in the world, because it sounds like it's falling apart.
Falling to pieces, yeah.
But it sort of made me, and that jacket, you write so beautifully about the lives that jacket had, its sort of previous owner. It has this really lived-in quality, which made me think about how sort of everything you write about, you're also giving us the kind of cultural life of the thing, how you've lived in it, the sort of emotional history of that thing. And I guess the one question maybe is sort of like, how do you know, when you're writing about these things that you have these long histories of attachment to, how do you know when it's time to write about them? How do you know when you're ready to write about something you've loved for a long time? Does it ever feel too soon or too late?
I can't stop. I think about it. I'm a runner, which I wasn't when I lived here. Did not run ever, but now I consider myself a runner. But I'm not. I don't like train for shit. Like I'm not trying to run like a marathon. I just want to run, And some days when I'm feeling exceptionally ambitious, which has not been this week, but at least once a week when I'm at home, I do this thing where I try to race the sun, where I get up and I try to get in a run, do like 6 to 7 miles before the sun rises, right? And there's something that intrigues me about that, because in the last, say, half mile of that run, the sun is undoubtedly coming up, and I'm almost running towards it. I'm almost running towards this thing that I know is gonna arrive, that I know will bring me delight when it arrives, and I know I cannot physically catch it, but we're trying to collide with each other. In some ways, I love a vintage object because it has been traveling towards me before I knew it, and I have been traveling toward it before it knew me. And in the space between that collision, the space between the moments we collide, I've loved it. I've loved the world that I can have with it in my orbit before I even knew it. It's the same way when I was writing music columns for like MTV News and stuff, I would always be asked to write immediate obituaries. Like if someone died, my editor would say, "Can you write this? We need it in 30 minutes." And I was so good at that because if you love someone enough, for me, if I love someone enough, I've already mourned the world without the minute. Like when Little Richard died, I could write that obituary in 25 minutes because I loved Little Richard so deeply that I had already grieved the world wherein he wasn't there. So to me, it's never a question of too early. Alternately, I think it's often a question of, is it too late? It's not too early for me because I can always return to something having loved it differently and better. And I think that's a vital thing for us to all understand, is not just writers or artists, as actual people. The task isn't to love something deeply one time. The task is to love something with such something in someone's with such a depth that alters over time as we alter. And so you're not tasking yourself with loving something once, you're tasking yourself with loving the constant evolution of something or someone. And that if you're lucky, is infinite in terms of inspiration and ability to create, and also an ability to learn yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Maybe relatedly, one of our editors noticed that you got to spend a little time in the Beinecke at the Langston Hughes papers.
Yeah.
Was that just out of curiosity, or are you?
No, we took a tour. We did like a little Beinecke tour. We got to see
and they
Langston
showed you
Hughes
all
stuff.
some stuff.
Yeah, and Langston Hughes is an Ohioan, so I was especially interested in the Penn and the Cleveland stuff. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
A lot of your work is very deeply researched. Do you have a research process?
I think, yeah, I do approach it exuberantly. And perhaps that's because of the kind of things I write. I know writers for whom research is just really excruciating. And I mentioned this yesterday in a conversation with Christina. At this point in my life, I just don't want to do anything that's even slightly uncomfortable, you know? If I can help it. Of course, we all have to endure some, we all have to wait in line to get a license renewal or, these kind of things. But if I can, in terms of my actual process, I want nothing. And I say this with a lot of love and respect and et cetera, et cetera. When writers, I know writers who are like, oh, writing is hell, it's a nightmare. It's like, man, you could do anything else. To understand, for me, like, I'm very in tune with the reality that the world does not require me or my work, I think that, and my ego is not large enough to believe that my work is necessary in the world. I think it enhances corners of some worlds for some people. But with that in mind, I have to say, I take a really pleasurable approach to research because so much of my work is governed by my obsessions. Mm-hmm. And if that means that I can, when writing that piece, for example, about the darkness, I have the vintage Springsteen jacket is from the darkness of the edge of town. It's like a promo jacket that the record label put out with the record. And for no reason at all, that gave me an opportunity to say, I wonder if I can find a set list for this tour. I wonder if I can find a full video of this tour being played in this city. That just deepens my affection for what I already love. Research is just research is an informative process. I obviously think that research is labor and we should take it seriously. But if you can swing it, research is also an opportunity to deepen your affection for what you're already kind of knee deep in. If you're gonna be there anyway. It's kind of one of those things where, like, if you're immersing yourself in the work, in the obsession anyway, then, add a little bit of decoration to it, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where I think, I understand that shit can be drab and it's not fun, but I think about it like, if the project is me just in a white room of a bland apartment that I just moved into, research gives me a chance to put some shit up on the walls that I like, and that makes all the work easier.
I'm gonna remember that the next time I'm miserably searching for something. Okay, last question requires you to make a choice between 4 categories. Favorites, last, first, or never?
Oh, gosh. Definitely not never, and definitely not last. Ooh, well, the last could be favorites and first?
Yeah, that's what's left.
Let's do first. I'm curious about that. I talk about my favorite things often.
Just what was the first piece of writing you read that made you want to write?
I'll give 2 quick answers. One is the very end of Toni Morrison's Jazz, that last paragraph. Mm-hmm. And then the first poem I read that made me feel like I could write a poem was, because again, I came to poems much later than everybody else. Adrian Matika, the poet Adrian Matika, has a poem called Maggot Brain about Eddie Hazel. And it uses the line, for folks who don't know the story of how Maggot Brain was made. It's a long story, but the short of it is George Clinton told the guitarist Eddie Hazel to play as if your mother died. And the line in that Adrian Matika poem that haunts me, that I would like just get tattooed all over my body everywhere if I were a person who would do something like that. There's this line at the end that is, Maggot Brain, somebody somewhere is losing a mother right now. I was like, that's the greatest line I've ever read. And every time I sit down to write a poem, I'm still chasing that poem and chasing that one line. So those are the 2 first, I think.
Amazing. Thank you, Hanif.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.